The morning I walked out of Harlan County Children's Home, I carried everything I had ever owned in a single army green duffel bag. 18 years of living reduced to 2 changes of clothes, a dog-eared Bible someone had left on my bunk years ago, and a photograph I had held so many times the edges had gone soft and warm. The photograph showed a man standing at the edge of a field, one hand resting on a fence post, the other raised to shade his eyes from the sun. Behind him, rolling hill country stretched toward a horizon line of dark timber, the kind of timber that had been growing undisturbed for a century. On the back of the photograph, in faded pencil, someone had written 3 words. Elias, the land. I did not know who Elias was when they first gave me that photograph. I was 4 years old when I came to Harlan County, and the social worker who left me at the home's front desk had offered only a single sentence of explanation. My father was gone, and there was no one else. In the years that followed, those 2 facts became the walls of the room I lived in. My father was gone. There was no one else. Ask about it, and the adults around you get a look on their faces like they're stepping over something they would rather not touch. So you learn, the way children in institutions always learn, to fold your questions up small and put them somewhere they will not cause you pain. My name, at least, belonged to me, James Elias Croft. The middle name was something I had spent years wondering about, or perhaps not a coincidence at all. Perhaps it was the only breadcrumb someone had been allowed to leave. Mrs. Aldridge was waiting for me at the front desk of the home's main building when I came downstairs that April morning. She had been running Harlan County Children's Home for longer than I had been alive. A small, deliberate woman with silver hair and reading glasses that always sat slightly crooked on her nose. She slid my discharge envelope across the counter, without preamble. My paperwork, a bus voucher good for 1 trip within the county, and 2 items she set apart from the rest. The first was a plain white envelope with my name written on the front in handwriting I did not recognize. The second was a key, not a modern key, an old iron key, heavy and dark, worn smooth around the bow from years of handling. The kind of key that belonged to another century, fitted with a short length of leather cord gone thin with age. Someone had kept that key for a very long time, and kept it carefully, not tossed in a drawer, but preserved with intention. The leather cord was a deliberate thing. You tie a cord to a key when you want someone to be able to find it in the dark. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. "What is this?" I said. Mrs. Aldridge pressed her lips together before answering. "It was left here 22 years ago," she said, "by someone who gave very specific instructions. You were to receive it, along with that envelope, on your 18th birthday. Not before, not after. Who left it?" She was quiet for a moment. The instructions did not include a name. She paused. But the return address on the original package was a post office box in Croft Hollow. Croft Hollow. My last name is Croft. I had always known that much. James Elias Croft, born Harlan County Memorial Hospital. Father deceased, mother unknown. The Croft name was the one thread of identity I had ever been handed. And for 18 years, nobody at Harlan County had been willing to pull it. I put the key in my pocket and picked up my bag. The front door opened onto a gray April morning, the kind that smells like wet earth and the end of something. The county road ran flat through fields just beginning to show the pale green of early spring, and the hills to the east were dark with timber that had never been cleared. Somewhere beyond those hills was a hollow that shared my name. I sat down on the front steps and opened the envelope. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight, because the rest of the story goes somewhere I still cannot fully believe myself, even now, even having lived it. Inside the envelope was a single folded sheet and a smaller handwritten card. The card read, "When the time comes, follow Route 7 east out of Harlan to the second bridge over Croft Creek. Take the logging road north half a mile. The cave is in the hillside above the old stone fence. The key opens the door. E.C. Elias Croft, the man in the photograph." The folded sheet was older than the card, the paper soft at the creases from decades of folding and unfolding, as if someone had read it many times before sealing it away. At the top, in careful block letters, deed receipt and trust notice, Harlan County Clerk of Court, filed October 14th, 1963. Below that was dense legal language, the kind that takes concentration to parse. But I read it slowly and steadily, read it twice and then a third time until its meaning was unmistakable. It said that a man named Elias James Croft of Croft Hollow, Harlan County, had filed with the county clerk a sealed trust document designating the mineral rights, water rights, and surface deed to the entirety of Croft Farm, 412 acres of eastern hill country, to be held in trust for his lineal descendants. The document named one primary beneficiary, my father, Daniel Ray Croft. A handwritten edition, witnessed and notarized by the county clerk on the same date, read, in the event of Daniel Ray Croft's death or incapacitation prior to the trust activation, all rights held in trust pass in full to Daniel's firstborn child upon their 18th birthday. I was Daniel Ray Croft's firstborn child, his only child, as far as I had ever been able to determine, and I was 18 years old that morning. Sitting on the front steps of the home that had been my world, holding a key and a deed notice and a handwritten card from a grandfather I had never met, I looked out at the fields. I looked at the photograph in my bag. Elias, the land. For the first time in my life, those two words felt like the beginning of a sentence rather than the end of one. Growing up at Harlan County Children's Home, you learn very quickly what you are permitted to want. You are permitted to want a warm meal and a dry bed. You are permitted to want to do well enough in school to get a job one day. You are not permitted to want family, not in any real and solid sense, because wanting family and not having it is a kind of hunger that can hollow you out if you let it run unchecked. I let it some years. I will not pretend otherwise. What I had instead of family was the photograph and the name, James Elias Croft. I asked about the middle name exactly once, when I was 9 years old, and the caseworker who handled my file said it was the name I had arrived with, and she did not know more than that. I filed the information away. Names mean something. People do not give a child a name that means nothing. What I pieced together over the years about my family came in fragments. The way truth always comes to people who are told they do not deserve it. An older resident of the home, a boy named Marcus who had since aged out, told me once that Croft Hollow was a real place, about 20 miles east on Route 7. He said there was a farm up there that had been in one family for generations. Old hill country. People in Harlan knew the Croft name, he said, and then he said that the way people say things they do not fully understand, with a faint respect they cannot quite account for. When I was 13, I went to the county library on a Saturday and asked the librarian about the Croft family. She was a kind woman who pulled the county history index without asking questions about why a boy from the children's home might want it. What I found was this. Elias James Croft had been a farmer and amateur geologist who had owned and operated Croft Farm in the Eastern Hills from 1931 until his death in 1967. He was known locally for his surveys of the creek drainage and limestone formations in the Eastern Hollow, work he had done not for any institution, but simply because understanding the land he lived on seemed to him a necessary thing. He had one son, Daniel Ray Croft, born 1952. Daniel Ray Croft had died in an automobile accident in 1990. He was 38 years old. I was 4. I had no memory of him. Sometimes I try to construct one from the photograph, from the set of the man's shoulders and the way he stood at the fence line, as if the ground beneath his feet were something he had earned and intended to keep. I do not know with certainty that the man in the photograph is my father rather than my grandfather. The handwriting just says Elias. But Elias and Daniel shared a name with me, and in the absence of everything else, that had to be enough to stand on. What the library record did not tell me, what I would not fully understand for 5 more years, was that after Daniel died, the farm had passed into the hands of a man named Raymond Harold Croft. Raymond was Elias's younger brother's son, a second cousin to my father. He had no direct claim to the land under the rules of ordinary inheritance except for this. As far as the county probate court was concerned, Daniel had died intestate, and his only heir, me, was a 4-year-old child in state care whose connection to the Croft family had apparently never been formally established in the probate record. Raymond Harold Croft had appeared in that probate proceeding and had sworn, in writing, before the court, that Daniel Ray Croft had left no children. He knew I existed. He simply decided I was more convenient as a non-existence. Raymond was comfortable by the time I was old enough to understand any of this. He lived in a brick house on the eastern ridge of the farm, drove a late model truck, and had sold the mineral rights to the Eastern Hill Country acreage to a coal company in 1989, 1 year before my father's death, a transaction that had generated enough money to keep a man in ease for the rest of his life. The farm surface he kept, the mineral money he spent, and the child in the county home he ignored, with the practiced ease of a man who has decided that what he does not acknowledge does not exist. I did not know the full shape of all this yet when I was 13. I knew only the name and the land and the particular quiet feeling of someone who understands, without being able to say exactly how, that something belonging to them has been taken. The specific moment of humiliation, the stone I have carried in my chest for years, came when I was 16. I had saved $11 from odd jobs around the home, enough for a bus ticket to the Route 7 junction east of Harlan. From there I walked. It took the better part 2 hours on a hot July morning to reach Croft Hollow, following the creek road up into the hills where the lane narrowed to a single track and the tree cover closed overhead. The farm appeared around a bend, fields that ran from the road to the ridge, a barn with a newer metal roof, fencing that had been recently replaced. Someone had invested in this land in recent years. Someone had put real money into it and was living well on what it produced. The house was large for the hollow, white-painted brick, a covered porch, a kitchen garden along the south face in neat rows. I stood at the gate and read the mailbox. R.H. Croft. A man came out onto the porch before I reached the gate. He was heavy-set, in his late 70s by then, with a full head of white hair and the kind of face that had once been handsome and now carried its age with settled, proprietary displeasure. He wore clean work clothes and boots that had never seen serious mud. He looked at me the way people look at something they were not expecting and did not want a quick appraisal, then the decision made, then the expression that follows a decision. "Help you?" he said. "My name is James Croft," I said. "James Elias Croft. I'm a ward of Harlan County Children's Home. I believe my father was Daniel Ray Croft." The man on the porch did not move. His expression did not change exactly, but something behind it did, a brief, cold calculation, like a door shutting in a room you cannot see. "I don't know any James Croft," he said. "I was born in 1990, I said, keeping my voice level. "My father died the same year. He was Daniel Ray Croft. His father was Elias James Croft, who owned this land. Raymond Harold Croft. And I knew it was him from a name on the mailbox and from a particular way he delivered what he said next, with the flat certainty of a man who has rehearsed a sentence, put one hand on the porch railing, and looked down at me from his elevation. "Boy," he said, "this farm has been in my family for 30 years. Whatever story somebody fed you about Daniel Croft having children, I can't help you with that. Daniel didn't have children. He was a bachelor." He let a beat of silence pass. "Now I suggest you get yourself back down that road before I call the county sheriff about a trespasser." I stood at that gate for a long moment. The July sun was on the back of my neck. I had walked 2 hours on a hot morning, and the man who was living on my grandfather's land was standing on his porch and telling me I did not exist. I turned around and walked back down the road. I did not cry until I was on the bus back to Harlan. And then I cried the way you cry when you understand that the world has made its decision about your story before you arrived, that it has decided, somewhere up ahead of you, without asking, that you do not have standing in your own life. After that day, I stopped asking questions. I kept my head down and finished school and told myself the farm was not mine. The name was just a name. Croft Hollow was just a hollow someone else happened to live in. I had always been good at putting away the things I could not have. It is a skill you develop early in that kind of life, and you get so good at it you almost stop knowing you are doing it. And then came a morning with the key. I took the county bus east on Route 7. The bus dropped me at the junction at 9:30 on that April morning. From the junction, Route 7 east ran straight through the flat bottomland for about 3 miles before the hills began to close in and the timber overhead thickened. The second bridge over Croft Creek was a narrow concrete span with rusted iron rails, and on the far side, the logging road pushed north into the hillside, barely visible through the new spring growth, just 2 worn tire tracks disappearing into young oak and poplar. I walked. The road climbed through second-growth hardwood, the limestone outcroppings breaking through the hillside soil at intervals, smooth and gray and old. After half a mile, the road leveled into a small clearing bordered on the east side by an old stone fence. Fieldstone, dry stack without mortar, laid in the old way that requires patience and the ability to read stone. The fence had been built by someone who intended it to outlast them, and it had. The mortar of decades was replaced by moss and compressed earth, but every stone held its position in the wall. Above the fence, the hillside rose sharply into a limestone face. That was where I saw the door. It was set directly into the rock, framed with squared timbers that had darkened with age but kept their integrity. The door itself was iron, plate iron, riveted, with a single large lock fitted flush into the face. Someone had mortared the frame at the edges, sealing the gap between the iron and the stone hillside, and the mortar had been applied with care, not slapped on but worked in, the way someone does it when they are building something they want to last a very specific length of time. The mortar had cracked in places over 6 decades. Thin veins of it had fallen away and left narrow gaps. But the door itself showed only surface rust, the kind that forms in the first few years and then stops, because whoever made this had used good metal and sealed it before the deep corrosion could set in. Someone had built this door to hold for 60 years and then opened cleanly. I stood in the clearing for a long time, holding the iron key in both hands. Then I walked to the door, fitted the key into the lock, and began to work it. The mechanism had not moved in 6 decades, and it resisted. Not violently, but with the quiet stubbornness of a thing that has forgotten its own purpose. I worked the key carefully, in small increments, feeling the tumblers shift against corrosion and time. Then, with a sound like something in a half-remembered dream, the lock turned. The door swung inward on hinges that had been oiled. Not recently, but once, with the kind of thoroughness that lasts. The opening behind it was dark and cool and smelled of old limestone and dry air and something else beneath both, something that took me a moment to identify. The particular smell of paper held for decades in a sealed, dry space. Old documents have a smell that is nothing like old books. Old books smell of use. Old documents smell of waiting. I stood at the threshold and let my eyes adjust. The cave was not large, 12 feet deep and 8 wide. The walls natural limestone, the floor level with packed clay. A kerosene lantern hung from an iron hook driven into the ceiling, a heavy, old-fashioned lantern, its reservoir sealed with a disc of wax. On the floor along the left wall, 3 metal strong boxes sat in a row, the kind used for surveying equipment and official records in the mid-20th century. They were bolted shut, but not padlocked. In the center of the cave, a wooden crate held a second lantern, a sealed tin of kerosene, and a box of matches. My grandfather had thought of everything. He had thought of the possibility that the lantern hanging on the hook might run dry. He had thought of the possibility that whoever came through the door might come after dark or in foul weather. He had thought of the possibility that 60 years was a long time, and some things needed to be replaced. I opened the kerosene tin, filled the lantern reservoir, and struck a match. The wick caught. Warm yellow light filled the cave, the shadows pushing back to corners, and I set the lantern on the nearest strong box and looked at what Elias Croft had built. I opened the first strong box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed at the edges with wax, was a leather-bound ledger. I unwrapped it carefully, the oilcloth stiff but intact. The cover read, Croft Farm Survey and Mineral Record, E.J. Croft, 1941 to 1963. I opened it to the first page. My grandfather's handwriting was neat and deliberate, the handwriting of a man who had taught himself precision because precision mattered to him, not as an affectation but as a form of respect for what he was recording. The first entries were survey notations from the 1940s, acreage measurements, drainage patterns, soil composition by field section, where the limestone ran close to the surface and where the clay-heavy soil held water. He had mapped his own land the way a scientist maps a subject he has committed his life to understanding. Then the entries shifted. Beginning in the mid-1950s, the ledger began to document something different. Coal, not the surface seams that had been strip-mined openly across eastern Kentucky for a generation, but a coal seam that Elias had traced underground, following the creek drainage east on the farm into the hillside. He had found the seam's outcropping in 1954, identified it by the fossil evidence in the adjacent limestone, and spent the following 9 years quietly measuring its depth and bearing and lateral extent. He had done this work himself, with a surveyor's transit borrowed from a friend and his own methodical patience, and he had not reported his findings to any mining company, because Elias Croft had understood something that Raymond Harold Croft had counted on him not understanding. The man who files a mineral rights claim and keeps filing, and keeps paying the annual maintenance fee, and keeps the paper trail clean in the county courthouse, owns what is under the ground, not the man who inherits the surface, not the man who shows up at the courthouse after a death and files a probate claim, without mentioning inconvenient heirs. The mineral rights are a separate legal instrument from the surface deed, and if they are properly filed and maintained, they belong to whoever's name is on the filing. Elias had filed his mineral rights claim with the county clerk in 1957. He had updated and confirmed it annually for 6 years, paying every filing fee himself in person at the county courthouse. He had done it quietly without announcement, the way he did everything that mattered. The second strong box contained the legal documents. Every mineral rights filing Elias had made, dating from 1957 through 1963, with the county clerk seal on each one. The original full trust document, dated October 14, 1963, the complete version of the summary I had received that morning, with 2 original signatures, a notary's seal, and a stamped county record confirmation number. The trust was complete. It was properly executed. It had been filed with the county, and a copy kept in the official record, which meant that what was in this box was corroborated by everything that existed in the Harlan County Courthouse. It also contained one other document that stopped my breath. A copy of the deed of sale between Raymond Harold Croft and Harlan Basin Coal Company, dated September 1989. The sale price was $430,000. The property sold was the mineral rights to the Eastern Hill Country acreage of Croft Farm, the precise rights that Elias had filed in trust for my father 26 years earlier. Raymond had sold what he did not own to a company that had not checked the title properly, and in the 12 years that followed, Harlan Basin Coal had mined that seam. The ledgers from the county mining registry, which Elias had obtained copies of through some means I could not entirely account for, showed 12 years of production records on a significant deep seam, one of the last productive underground operations in the county before the company had pivoted to surface extraction elsewhere. The royalty revenue owed to the Croft Mineral Rights Trust at the standard rate per ton of production across 12 years of active mining was a number I could not fully hold in my mind while standing in a cave in the hillside. The third strong box contained the letter. It was sealed in a heavy envelope, addressed in my grandfather's hand, Daniel Ray Croft, and if Daniel cannot be reached, to Daniel's firstborn child. The wax seal was intact and unbroken. I broke it carefully, the way you break something you know you will not be able to restore. The letter was 8 pages long, written in the same precise hand as the ledger entries, but with something different in the rhythm of the sentences. The ledger was the handwriting of a scientist. The letter was the handwriting of a father. He wrote about the land the way people write about the things they love most, not with sentimentality, but with a specificity that only comes from decades of intimate knowledge. He knew every drainage ditch and stone fence on 412 acres. He knew where the soil changed from limestone heavy to clay rich, and what that meant for what you could grow and what you could not. He knew the coal seams bearing in depth and lateral extent better than any company surveyor had when they eventually came to work it, because he had done the measurements himself over 9 careful years, rather than trusting someone whose loyalties ran elsewhere. He wrote about Raymond. Raymond, he said, had always understood money better than land. When their father died in 1948, Raymond had attempted to claim a portion of the farm that the will did not give him, and Elias had spent 2 years in county court establishing clear title. He had won that proceeding, but the cost was that Raymond never forgave him for winning it, and never stopped looking for the angle that would let him take what he had always believed should be his. In 1962, Elias had discovered that Raymond had met with representatives of a coal company without his knowledge, attempting to negotiate a future sale of mineral rights he did not yet own and had no legal claim to. Elias had been warned by a friend at the county courthouse who had seen Raymond come in asking questions about the mineral rights filing. He had understood immediately what his nephew was planning and had moved quickly, building the legal architecture of the trust and sealing in the county record before Raymond could act. "I know that I cannot watch this farm forever," he wrote. "I am 61 years old, and Daniel is 11. By the time Daniel is grown and old enough to understand what I have built for him, I may not be here to walk him through it." And Raymond is a patient man when patience serves him. He described the trust structure in plain language so that whoever read the letter would be able to act on it without needing a legal education. He described the county records that corroborated every document in the box. He described the mechanism by which the mineral rights, if ever wrongfully sold, could be challenged and recovered. And he described it precisely, the way you describe a tool to someone who has never used one but will need to. Then, near the end of the letter, he did something that made me set the pages down on the cave floor and press both hands against my face for a long moment before I could continue. He wrote about me, not by name. He could not have known my name, could not have known I would be a boy or a girl, could not have known the specific shape that Daniel's life would take or the specific shape that Daniel's absence would leave behind. But he wrote, "If it is Daniel's child who finds this place rather than Daniel himself, I want you to know one thing above everything else that is in these boxes. You did not come from nothing. You came from this land. This hollow carries your name because your people put their work into it for 4 generations. And that work does not disappear just because powerful men decide it should. What the law protected, the law can restore. Find a good lawyer. Go to the courthouse. Ask for the Croft Mineral Rights Trust, filed October 1963. Take the documents in the second box with you. Take what belongs to you." He ended the letter simply, with the directness of a man who did not believe in elaborate endings. The land remembers who kept it. The land always remembers. Elias James Croft. October 14th, 1963. If this story is moving you, hit the like button and turn on the bell so you never miss another story like this one. I came out of the cave an hour after I entered it. The April morning had opened up while I was inside. Clouds burning off to a clean spring blue, the hillside above the stone fence bright with light. I stood in the clearing and breathed the open air, holding the oilcloth bundle against my chest. And for a long time I simply stood there, letting the weight of what was in my hands become real. Then I sat down on the old stone fence and took out the bus voucher. On the blank back of it, I wrote down every piece of information I would need: the trust filing date, the county record number, Raymond Harold Croft's name, the coal company's name, the sale date, the production record years. I wrote it all down clearly, the way Elias had always written things down, because precision is what makes truth useful rather than merely true. Then I went to find a lawyer. Patricia Slade had a one-room office above a hardware store in Harlan, the kind of office that is modest enough to be honest and organized enough to be serious. She had been practicing law in the county for 22 years. Her walls were floor-to-ceiling files. Her desk was covered in open casebooks, and she listened to me explain the situation without interrupting, which is a thing that not every lawyer does and that I was grateful for, because I needed to say it without stopping to answer questions before I had finished saying all of it. When I was done, she held out her hand for the documents. She read for 25 minutes. She read the way lawyers read, moving back and forth between pages, checking dates against filing numbers, making small marks in the margins of her notepad. When she finished, she set everything down with the careful deliberateness of someone handling something she now understood to be significant. She looked at me over her reading glasses. "How old are you?" 18, I said, "as of this morning." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her pen. "All right," she said. "Let's go through this from the beginning." What Patricia Slade explained to me over the next 2.5 hours was this. A mineral rights trust properly filed with the county clerk and renewed annually is a matter of public record and cannot be transferred, sold, or encumbered without the trustee's authorization. My grandfather had named the county clerk's office as the administrative trustee of record, which meant that for any sale of those mineral rights to be legally valid, the county clerk's office would have had to authorize the transaction and confirm that no trust encumbrance existed on the title. The county clerk had done no such thing in 1989 when Raymond sold to Harlan Basin Coal, because Raymond had not disclosed the existence of the trust. The mineral rights title search that Harlan Basin's attorneys had conducted prior to purchase had either failed to find the trust filing or had found it and not reported it, either which created serious legal exposure for both parties. Patricia pulled the coal company's public production filings from the state mining registry on her computer while I sat across from her. Harlan Basin had mined the seam from 1991 to 2003, 12 years of documented production. The royalty revenue owed to the Croft Mineral Rights Trust, calculated at the standard rate against the company's own file production figures, came to between $2.5 and $4 million, depending on which calculation methodology the court applied, with accumulated statutory interest on undistributed trust funds, because the money had been sitting legally owed to the trust for over 2 decades, and with potential fraud damages under Kentucky statute. The actual recovery figure was substantially higher than that range. I sat very still in the chair across from Patricia Slade and let that settle into me the way cold water settles into dry ground. "Is this real?" I said. "This is actually enforceable?" "The documents are real," she said carefully. "The trust filing is properly executed and a matter of county record. The production history is the company's own public filing. The fraud appears to be what the documents suggest it is." She looked at me steadily. "What I can tell you with certainty is that you have grounds for legal action. What I can tell you with near certainty is that those grounds are solid. What the final recovery figure will be is for the court to determine." She paused. "But yes, this is real." She asked me about Raymond Harold Croft. I told her about the afternoon when I was 16, the gait, the words he had used. She wrote without commenting. Then she asked whether he was still on the farm. He was, as far as I knew. "There's a separate matter here from the mineral rights fraud," she said, "which is the probate representation he made in 1991. He signed a court document stating that Daniel Ray Croft left no children. If that was knowingly false," she left the sentence unfinished for a moment, "that is a matter the court takes seriously. I already knew the shape of it. Raymond had appeared in the probate court the year after my father died and told the judge there were no heirs. He had known I was alive because Mrs. Aldridge's records showed that a Raymond H. Croft had been contacted in 1990 as a potential family placement option for a 4-year-old boy named James Elias Croft and had declined, citing no family connection. He had known, and he had told the court otherwise, and he had walked out of that courthouse with a 400-acre farm that should have been held in trust for me. "What would you like to do?" Patricia said. I thought about the cave in the hillside, about Elias, who had spent his last years building a structure that could not be climbed or demolished, only walked through when the right person arrived with the right key. I thought about my father, who had died before he got the chance to stand in that clearing. I thought about 16-year-old James Croft, walking 2 hours in the July heat to knock on a gate, and being told he did not exist. "I don't want to destroy him," I said. "I want the truth to be in the room. That's all. I want every document on that table, and I want him sitting across from it." Patricia looked at me for a long moment with the expression of a lawyer who has done this work long enough to know the difference between a client who wants revenge and a client who wants justice, and who knows that those are not the same thing. "Then let's make sure it gets there," she said. We sent Raymond Harold Croft a certified letter 14 days later. I had spent most of those 14 days the way you spend time when you are waiting for something enormous to be set in motion, restlessly, and with the particular exhaustion of a person who cannot stop thinking. I sat in the county library and read about mineral rights law. I drove out to Croft Hollow twice. Not going in, just sitting at the creek bridge and looking at the hills that held the farm, trying to understand what I felt about them. It was not simple. Nothing about any of this was simple. Raymond's attorney, a local man named Gruber who was blunt in his initial communications, called Patricia's office 3 days after the certified letter arrived. The initial conversation was the expected one: denial, procedural objection, the suggestion that the documents might be fraudulent or the trust might be unenforceable after so many years. Patricia handled each position without raising her voice. She was in possession of original documents with county seals. She was in possession of the coal company's own production records. She was in possession of the 1991 probate filing, in which Raymond had sworn Daniel Ray Croft left no children. Then Patricia asked Gruber a single question, and she asked it calmly and without inflection. Had Raymond Harold Croft, when he made that declaration to the probate court in 1991, been aware that Daniel Ray Croft's son James was a ward of Harlan County Children's Home? The line was quiet for a long time. He had been aware. It was documented. The meeting was arranged 3 weeks after the letter. Raymond's attorney had agreed to an informal conference in Patricia's office. No courthouse steps, no public proceedings. Just the parties and their counsel in a room with the documents on the table. It was a kind of meeting that happens when the other side understands that the documents are real, and the only remaining question is what happens next. Raymond Harold Croft came in with his attorney, and he sat down across from me, and I watched him understand. In the moment he looked at my face, who he was looking at. He was 81 years old. He was still a large man, and he wore his age the way men of his generation wore it. Upright, composed, the face holding its shape even when the interior was not. He looked at me with the careful appraisal of a man who had made a decision 22 years ago and had spent 2 decades not having to think about it. Now it was in the room. Patricia laid the documents out in order. Without ceremony, the way you arrange the pieces of thing that is already assembled and only needs to be seen. The trust filing, the county confirmation, the deed of sale to Harlan Basin, the production records, the statutory royalty calculation, the 1991 probate filing, and the date on Mrs. Aldridge's contact record showing Raymond had been reached by the county that same year. 12 years of coal production, 20 years of statutory interest, and 1 sworn statement to a probate court that Raymond Harold Croft had known was false when he made it. Gruber raised each counter he had prepared. The statute of limitations on the mineral rights claim, the question of whether the trust structure was technically valid after the beneficiary's death, the possibility that the coal company bore the primary liability rather than Raymond. Patricia answered each one, not quickly, carefully, with the documents, the way Elias himself would have answered them if he could have been in the room. The trust terms were clear about the successor beneficiary. The statute of limitations did not apply to fraud. The coal company's liability did not eliminate Raymond's. Then the room went quiet. Raymond looked at his hands on the table. He was a large man, and had been a proud one, and the pride was still there in the set of his shoulders, but something beneath it had given way. I watched it happen. It was not dramatic. It was the way a wall gives way not with a collapse, but with the sound of settling, a slow giving that is over before you fully understand has begun. "The boy came to my house," Raymond said. He was not speaking to anyone in particular. He was speaking to the room, and perhaps to something beyond the room. When he was a teenager, walked all the way up from the county road in the middle of summer. He stopped. I told him there was no connection. Nobody said anything. He was 16 years old, Raymond said again, and this time he said it as if he were hearing it for the first time. He stood at my gate and told me his name, and I told him he didn't exist. He looked up at me then, and the calculation was gone from his face, and what was left underneath it was older and less composed, and, I thought, more honest than anything he'd shown in the earlier part of his life. I knew what I was doing. I knew he was Daniel's. I knew at the moment I saw him standing there. He was quiet for a moment. I just told myself it was too late to change things. Gruber put a hand briefly on his arm. Raymond looked at me with the directness of a man who has finally reached a place where there is nothing left to protect. "What I did," he said, "to you and to this land, I cannot undo. I have lived well on what belonged to you, and I told myself stories about why that was acceptable, and there's not a single story I ever told myself about it that holds up now." He breathed out slowly. "I am sorry. I know that is not sufficient. I know it does not come close to sufficient. But I am telling you I am sorry, because it is the only true thing I have left to say." I had thought about this moment a great deal, about what I would say if it came, about what anger was worth and what it cost and what it built, and I had decided, somewhere in those 2 weeks of sitting with the weight of it, that I did not want to fill this moment with what had been done to me. I had been carrying that weight since I was old enough to understand there was something to carry. I did not need to put it down on Raymond's head. "What you did is going to be in the legal record," I said. "That's not something I can undo, and it's not something I want to undo. The record matters. The truth being on paper matters." I paused, but the record isn't the whole story. Elias is part of the story. My father is part of the story. That cave and hillside, sealed for 60 years, is part of the story. I looked at Raymond steadily. And I am part of it. What belongs to me was never really buried. It was waiting for me to be old enough to come and get it. Raymond Harold Croft looked at the documents on the table. Then he looked at his attorney, and his attorney looked back at him, and the decision that passed between them was visible and final. The legal resolution took 8 months. Harlan Basin Coal Company, when served with the trust documentation and the nature of the fraudulent sale, settled out of court. Their attorneys understood, once the chain of title was fully established, that the company had operated a mine for 12 years under a title they had purchased from a party who did not have legal authority to sell it, and that their own production records constituted the most precise possible accounting of what they owed. The settlement figure, after negotiation and the application of statutory interest, was substantial. It was not a number that restored the years or gave me back a father or a childhood or the particular thing that is lost when you spend your life being told you come from nothing. But it was real, and it was mine, and it was what Elias had spent the last years of his life working to make possible. Raymond Harold Croft's situation was handled in a separate proceeding. He was elderly, and the probate fraud, while serious, was weighed by the court against his age and the absence of a criminal intent to pursue charges. He signed a consent agreement acknowledging the full validity of the trust, relinquishing any remaining claim to the surface farm and its income since 1990, and providing a full accounting of revenue received from the land during the years he had held it. A portion of that revenue was returned to the trust. He sold the brick house on the ridge and moved to live with his daughter in another county. I have not spoken to him since the day in Patricia Slade's office. I hope he found some peace with what he had done. I have found that carrying the weight of other people's harm alongside your own is exhausting work, and I had spent enough years at it. I was not willing to spend more. The first morning I stood on Croft Farm as its legal owner, it was early June, the fields deep green, and the sky the particular blue of a morning after a long rain has finally passed. I walked the fence line from the south corner to the north, following the stone walls and wire fencing to the bottom ground, and up into the eastern hillside. For 112 acres of limestone hill country and creek bottom soil and timber that had been growing undisturbed for a generation. I walked it the way Elias had walked it. I walked it slowly. What I understood, standing at the north corner of the fence with the eastern hills above me and the creek shining below, was this: the farm was not a prize. It was not a windfall or a trophy or a conclusion. It was a responsibility. The same one Elias had understood and tried to pass to my father and managed, through 60 years of patience and a cave and a hillside and an iron key on a leather cord, to pass to me instead. I leased the bottom ground to a neighbor family who had worked adjacent land for 2 decades and knew the soil the way it needed to be known. I left the timber standing on the upper acreage, hiring a forestry consultant to assess its health and make a plan for the years ahead. The cave I left as it was. The door closed but unlocked now. The lantern rehung on its hook. The strong boxes back in their places with copies of all the documents beside the originals. I went up to that hillside on the first clear morning after I got the deed, and I sat inside the cave for an hour in the lantern light, and I read the letter one more time, because some things are worth reading more than once. Mrs. Aldridge came out to the farm in August. I had called her and asked her to come, and she came without ceremony, in her own car, wearing sensible shoes for the walk up the logging road. I showed her the cave. I showed her the ledger and the legal documents and the letter. She stood at the cave entrance and read the letter in the lantern light, holding it the way you hold something you understand to be important without fully understanding why yet. When she finished, she folded it the way she had found it. "He was a thorough man," she said quietly. "He was," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "You know," she said, "there were years when I wondered if I was doing the right thing, keeping that envelope, following the instructions exactly. Some mornings I thought maybe I should have told you more, done something to help you find this sooner." She looked out from the cave entrance, across the clearing. The instructions said to wait until 18, but sometimes I wondered. "You did exactly what he asked," I said. "That's why it worked. He built the whole thing to work only if the instructions were followed. You followed them." She put her hand briefly on my arm, the way people do when words are not quite enough, and we walked back down the hillside together, through the clearing and the young hardwood, and out onto the county road, where her car was parked. I stood and watched her drive away, and then I stood there for a while longer, looking at the hills, letting the morning be quiet around me. There is one thing more that I have not yet mentioned: the trust document that Elias filed in 1963. The full 8-page original that I found in the second strongbox contained provision in the final section that his lawyers had included at his specific request. It was written in careful, plain language, not the dense legal prose of surrounding pages, but the direct voice of a man who knew what he was trying to say and said it. It specified that a portion of any funds recovered through the Mineral Rights Trust, in the event that those rights were ever wrongfully transferred and subsequently recovered through legal action, should be set aside for a designated purpose: for the establishment and maintenance of an educational support fund for children in Harlan County who have no family member to advocate on their behalf in matters of education, legal standing, or inheritance. He had been thinking of the possibility of me, or the children who would come after, who might find themselves in the same position, isolated, unrecognized, told by the world that they had no standing in their own story. Patricia helped me establish the fund through the county. It is not large, measured against what some foundations are, but it is real and it is funded. And every year it helps a small number of young people in Harlan County with scholarships and legal consultation, and the particular kind of support that comes from knowing someone has already built a structure on your behalf and left the gate open. I named it the Elias James Croft Foundation. That seemed right. That seemed like the name belonged to the work. On a morning in late October, almost exactly a year from the morning I walked out of Harlan County Children's Home with a duffel bag and a photograph and a key, I drove up the county road at first light and parked at the edge of the south field. The frost was still on the grass. The hills to the east were running orange and deep red with the full turn of the season, the hardwood displaying what had been building toward all summer, and the creek at the bottom of the property ran clear and cold, the way it must have run when Elias walked the same fence line more than half a century before. I took the photograph out of the glove compartment. The man at the fence post, his hand raised against the sun, the hill country behind him dark with timber, the handwriting on the back. I walked out the fence and stood where I thought he might have stood. The sun was rising over the ridge, burning the frost off the grass in slow patches. Below me, the bottom fields held the pale gold of late-season grass, unharvested and quietly resting. Above me, the hillside rose where the cave door sat in the limestone face, closed and still. I was not a man who had been given much, but I was a man who had been given exactly what he needed, exactly when he needed it, by a grandfather he had never met, through a letter that had waited 60 years to be read, in a cave sealed against dishonesty and time with an iron door and a leather cord key, and a particular fate that a careful man places in the future when he cannot be there to speak for himself. The land remembers who kept it. Elias had written. Standing at the fence line in the October light, watching the frost burn off the fields and the creek run clean below the old stone wall, I understood what he had meant, not as a sentiment, but as a fact, the way true things are facts rather than feelings. The land had kept the record. The land had held the documents in the hillside for 6 decades without anyone's permission. The land had waited the way patient things wait until the right person showed up with the right key. And now the right person was here. The fields were here. The work was ahead, the long, slow work of understanding 412 acres of hill country in all its seasons and moods and requirements. The work that Elias had loved and my father had been denied, and I had been given. I put the photograph back in my pocket. I looked at the hills for a long time. Then I turned back toward the farm. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the other stories on screen right now.